Today we're joined by triple board certified neuropsychologist Dr. Judy Ho talking about the Dark Triad personality styles. Dr. Judy, this is the first time I've heard of this phrase. What are we talking about here?
So Dark Triad is really interesting. It is a set of traits that are associated with individuals who, for example, commit crimes, who are escape or con artists, who essentially eventually end up in the justice system one way or another. And a lot of our research is derived from individuals who eventually found their ways to jail or prisons. But over the years, we have found that these individuals are also found in what we call community populations. This means that they're not necessarily in the justice system in any way, but in the community, they're wreaking some havoc because of what they're doing. And I think that oftentimes people have all these questions about what the Dark Triad might actually even predict. Is it actually predictive of, for example, marital problems, inability to hold a job, and eventual venturing into crime? And there is some predictive power, but there are also some individuals who just continue to live among us and don't actually suffer any legal repercussions.
Is this the Dark Triad styles? Is this in the DSM anywhere, or is this just something we've come up with?
The Dark Triad is not in the DSM. It's thought to be personality traits or dimensions. So it's kind of like a type of personality theory, except it's talking about the most negative personality traits a person can have. So in contrast, there's also now what's been proposed as a light triad. It's this idea that, hey, what about these really positive traits that somebody can have that would be essentially the antithesis of a crime or criminal mentality. So really interesting, but the Dark Triad is the one that actually has the most research around it. Light Triad is a very new concept. Dark Triad is something that has been associated with everyone's fascination with psychopathy, what really makes a psychopath. And in fact, one of the three major personality dimensions of the Dark Triad is psychopathy.
So if one's psychopathy, what are the other two?
So psychopathy is actually thought to be the worst trait in the Dark Triad because it speaks to that lack of empathy a person has, almost a lack of morality in a lot of cases, where they just don't feel sorry for the times when they've hurt other people or stepped on others to get ahead. And essentially a human life is not of that much significance to them unless it's their own. The other two traits are Machiavellianism and narcissism. So narcissism, we talk about quite often. Narcissism is this idea of grandiose self-importance. The person oftentimes gets really angry if they don't get that special attention they believe they deserve. And there is some overlap with psychopathy because a person who is narcissistic can also be not very empathetic. And they'll do anything essentially to get ahead as long as they're the ones being rewarded in the end. Machiavellianism is a really interesting one. This is this idea that the person is cunning, they're manipulative, and they deceive people for a purpose. They deceive people, one, to get at some kind of monetary or tangible gain, or two, they deceive people because it's pleasurable to them. It makes them feel like they're better than other people. And for these reasons, it's really thought to be an interesting trait that's also sometimes linked to intellectual ability. A lot of individuals who have this type of trait are also very smart, and they think of different ways to outsmart other people, con other people out of things that they really value. So the interesting thing with the Dark Triad is there's a bit of overlap, as you can see, with all three traits. You can kind of see that when we talk about psychopathy and narcissism and Machiavellianism, there's something that kind of spills over to all three, but then each of them also have their distinct traits. And this actually led to a lot of controversy too, because some researchers and clinicians are saying, well, isn't this just one big trait then? But I think there's enough evidence that these three are different but related constructs. And I think other researchers and clinicians are saying, well, they're three interrelated constructs, and together they might form a personality style that could eventually be its own personality disorder diagnosis in a future DSM.
Wow. And to be clear, when we say psychopathy, are we referring to antisocial personality disorder?
So psychopathy is actually a type of trait, whereas antisocial personality disorder is a diagnosis in the DSM. So psychopathy is not a trait, psychopathy is not a disorder that can be diagnosed, but it is thought to be the closest representation when we talk about things colloquially to the diagnosable antisocial personality disorder. And that's because psychopathy speaks to things like lack of empathy, and this idea that a human life is really not that worthwhile unless it's their own. And those types of ideas are covered in the antisocial personality disorder diagnosis.
Dr. Judy, what do you think are some of the bigger misconceptions around these dark triad personality styles?
I think some of the misconceptions around these dark triad personality styles is that oftentimes people think that it means that they're definitely destined for a life of crime. And that's just not the case. There's a lot of individuals who have these dark triad personality traits, and actually they continue to function in society. They might wreak havoc in other ways and may make it difficult for you to have a relationship with them or to work with them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to commit crimes, and certainly not necessarily crimes of a violent nature.
Yeah. Well, this has certainly caught a lot of people's attention, so I'm glad we'll be covering it here on MedCircle. And thank you for your time today, Dr. Judy.
Thank you, Kyle.
Remember, whatever you're going through, you got this.